Hey everybody, welcome back. It has been quite some time since I have uploaded on this channel, and I do apologize for that, and I don't really have an excuse for that other than I just kind of got bored of uploading for a while for like the first couple weeks, and then I just didn't really want to get back into it. So we're just gonna go on with the video and pretend that never happened, and welcome to What If Luffy Had the Storm Fruit, or Arashi Arashi no Mi, and let's just start right away. And so, here is part 1. We see a young Luffy drinking juice at Makino's bar when the doors rattle open, and a bunch of pirates walk in, and the main one has red hair. As Luffy looks over, he can immediately recognize exactly what these people are, and gets kind of excited because he wants to be a pirate too, because that's just where the freedom is at. And so he starts having a conversation with the captain, and asks him if he can actually join his crew. And Shanks would obviously say no, because he's just a kid and he's weak and he can't even swim yet. And their conversation would go pretty normally until Higuma the bear would walk in. He asks for some, booze, and of course, Shanks and his crew just drank it all. And so he gets kind of pissed at that, and he grabs the bottle that Shanks offered him and smashed it right over his head. Luffy, kind of ignoring it at this point, just kind of looks over at the chest that is sitting next to Shanks, and everybody else is distracted, and he looks at it. He opens it up, and he sees a strange fruit inside of it. It was some type of melon, and it had many weird colors on it. It had almost what looked like squares of different blues and whites, and different shades of those type of colors, even one that looked almost kind of purple. And Luffy, not really thinking much of it, would just put it in his mouth and eat it. And he immediately regrets that decision, and he almost spits it out, but Luffy, being the determined little man he is, he just swallows the whole thing in a single bite. And so, Luffy ate the Arashi Arashi no Mi. So, we go back to Higuma and Shanks that are having their little conversation, and Higuma pulls out his sword and he slams it down on the counter, breaking different bottles, glasses, and just damaging everything altogether. At this point, Luffy looks back over and he gets pissed at what he sees. He sees them messing up basically his caretaker's place of work and where he's been living for the past while now, and so he gets pissed. He jumps up on the table and he sends a death glare over at Higuma, and Shanks feels something. A small burst of Conqueror's Haki leaks out of Luffy at this moment. Higuma actually gets a little bit of sweat rolling down his face, and he looks at the kid like, the hell did he just do to me? And at this point, he's already pissed, and so he swings his sword at Luffy, not really thinking much about it. Nobody is really close enough to be able to help him, and so the sword goes straight through Luffy's midsection. However, something odd happens. Instead of a bunch of blood splurting out, it seems like Luffy's body is split in half, but then it reforms, and what looks like storm clouds are in the middle. And at this point, Shanks immediately recognizes what has just happened. Luffy ate a devil fruit. And Luffy's also very shocked by this, and Higuma drops his sword and is shaking his hand a little bit because he just got electrocuted from trying to cut this kid. He's really confused by that. And he looks at the kid a little bit more fearful now, and he just starts to leave. He doesn't want to have to deal with this monster, and so he runs out of the bar yelling, "The kid's a fucking monster!" And so he and his bandits would leave, and Shanks gives Luffy a very serious look. Luffy is looking down at his stomach in absolute shock, wondering what exactly just happened, and Shanks asks, "Do you know what you just did?" Luffy looks over at him and shakes his head no with a nervous look on his face, and Shanks would say, "You just ate the Arashi Arashi no Mi, or the Storm no Mi, and you became a storm human. It's a very powerful Logia-based devil fruit, and kind of explains a little bit of exactly what that means to him, what exactly it means to be a Logia fruit, how the different rarities of the fruits work, and Luffy kind of just lets this all roll over his head as soon as he learns that he is a storm person, because he thinks that that is awesome. It's not like where he was rubber and he panics, because that's kind of weird. It's like he's a living storm now. He's going to be so powerful, and his dream is going to come to fruition too. And so we see another little bit of a time skip. Luffy and Shanks's interactions don't really change all that much, except for the fact that Shanks doesn't really have to sacrifice his arm for him because of the fact that Higuma isn't going to try to, like, kidnap Luffy. They'll never expect a bandit to be out on the sea, as, he said that one time. But this does not mean that he does not give Luffy his hat, because that was because of the fact that Luffy reminded him of Roger, and obviously Luffy would still very much remind him of Roger. And so Luffy would go and get transported, basically, to the top of the mountains on Fuchsia Island. That's not quite right. Gets transported from Dawn Island to Mount Kaluba, which is on the same island. It's just the village is Fuchsia and not Fuchsia Island. I don't know why I said that wrong, but I did. Anyway, let's continue. And so we see Luffy meeting Ace for the first time. Ace would spit at Luffy, and Luffy would actually be a lot faster than he would be normally. His body is quite literally made of partial lightning, and so he would simply tilt his head out of the way, seeming some kind of sixth sense. And so Ace would look at Luffy a little bit, he'd send him that glare, and Luffy would look back at him and say, "Hey, you want to be friends?" Ace would scoff and start to walk away, and Garp would introduce Ace. He'd say that that's going to be his big brother, and to go easy on him because he knows of Luffy's devil fruit powers, and he knows that he could probably beat the ever-living shit out of Ace if he really wanted to. And so we see Luffy getting settled in with the bandits, and we see that he doesn't have any food on his plate while everybody else does, and he asks, "Hey, why don't I have any food?" And, of course, this being the case, Dodon would look at the little boy and say that he needs to go get his own food and he needs to do his own chores as well. And Luffy pouts a little bit at this, but decides to just, deal with it, and he gets up and walks out into the forest. And so we see Luffy walking out into the forest, and quite easily, as a matter of fact, like nothing can even really touch him because of what he is made of, he hunts down many giant beasts and drags them back towards the top of the mountain. And so we see Luffy dragging all of these creatures. We'll say he has 3 of them behind him, and all of them are massive compared to him, and nobody really understands how he's even dragging them. And everybody's kind of shocked by this, but also they're very excited because they're going to have a nice feast for the night. Ace looks at this a little bit suspiciously, like how the hell did this kid actually manage to hunt those things, but decides to let it slide for the time being. And so they go to bed for that night, and Luffy wakes up at around the same time Ace does, and he sees him leaving the cabin, or wherever it is, that little bandit hideout that they're in, decides he wants to follow him. And so we have this chase scene, effectively, where we see Luffy getting caught in multiple different traps, not really ever getting injured by them, managing to catch up to Ace once again, and finally, we see Luffy at the base of the tree where Ace and Sabo are. Yes, he did this on his first try. It didn't take him weeks of, basically training in the forest, trying to keep up with him. And so we see him climbing up to the top of this tree where the 2 brothers, or 2 friends, they're not brothers at this point, are. And so we see Luffy getting introduced to Sabo and vice versa. They decide that they don't really, like this kid and they don't trust him, and they tie him up and are talking about killing him. Luffy doesn't really panic at this point because he obviously knows that they're not going to be able to kill him, and he's not stupid enough to tell them to drown him in water. Yes, I am making Luffy slightly smarter. I'm not going to make him like a genius, like he's not going to be Captain Kuro of 1,000 plans or anything like that, but I am going to give him some sort of common sense, basically. I guess I could say it is a better way to put it. And so we see them tying Luffy up to this tree, and then they start to panic because they realize that Porchemy and his men are coming. Members of the Blue Jam Pirates that have been basically trying to catch these kids for a while now after they stole from him. And so we see Porchemy walking up to Luffy and asking if he knows who Ace is. Luffy, still being a quite bad liar, would basically give it away immediately that he knows exactly who Ace is and just isn't telling them exactly who it is. And so we see him getting taken away to get questioned, as some would call it, or tortured, but we see Luffy getting taken away nonetheless. And so we see Porchemy very hardly trying to beat Luffy and trying to get information out of him, but obviously nothing would be working. Every time he tries to hit Luffy with anything, whether it be his knuckles or even something like brass knuckles or a sword or anything, all that really he accomplishes is getting himself electrocuted and Luffy kind of feeling entertained by watching this happen. Obviously none of them are going to have haki, and they realize almost immediately that this kid has a devil fruit, and they know exactly what the devil fruit weakness would be, that being water. And so, as Luffy sees them pulling out water and trying to basically like splash it on him in order to get his body to be normal, this is where Ace and Sabo would come in. They jump through the window and they rescue Luffy. Well, he didn't really need to be rescued. He just didn't really... He's trying to make friends here, and he doesn't really want them to see him as being weird or being anything different from them. And so we see Luffy, Ace, and Sabo escaping from the Porchemy little gang that he has. And so we see them running through Grey Terminal and back up towards their tree, where they decide that they need to transport their loot because Porchemy was right next to the tree where they had all of their stuff at, and they figured that that's probably where they'll go back to look for them. And so, taking all of their treasures out of this tree, they go and build a tree house about a mile, maybe 2 miles away from that location. And so, you see the brothers growing up together for a time. They exchange sake cups and become they become brothers, and of course, the next little big event is obviously going to be where the Blue Jam Pirates team up with Sabo's dad. I can't remember his name, nobody really cares about him, and he decides that he needs to get Sabo back, and he's going to use his 2 little friends as basically blackmail to get him to come back. And so we see Sabo basically telling Luffy and Ace that he is going to leave and they don't need to try and stop him. And this is where Luffy unveils his powers to them for the first time. Well, no, probably not. That just doesn't even seem realistic. They would probably know by now. They just don't really understand just how strong he actually is. And so we see the heavens start to basically rumble. We see many clouds gathering above in the skies, and we see Luffy starting to basically release this aura. And yes, he is releasing Conqueror's Haki subconsciously. This is the second time that this has happened, and it is because Luffy is royally pissed. Not only are his brothers underestimating him, but also there are these people that are trying to take his brother away from him. And so, lightning bolts rain down from the skies and strike down on many different people. Many different people. Porchemy, by the skin of his teeth, manages, or not Porchemy, no, Blue Jam, the only one who's even slightly strong, but even then he's not really that strong. I'm gonna go on by luck, manages to dodge one of these lightning bolts, and he charges towards Luffy, seeing that he is the originator of this power. Luffy looks up with a glare, and his arm starts to be encased with a strange thing. It almost doesn't really seem like anything is there, but it's almost like the air is condensing around Luffy's arm. And so, Luffy launches forward at the same time, and he slams out his fist towards Blue Jam, and launches him, like, flying completely off of the island, like basically what he does with his Gum Gum Bazooka, sending people flying off into the horizon. That's exactly what he does to Blue Jam here, and Blue Jam is gone. I'm not gonna say he's dead, but he's probably dead. And so Sabo has been saved, and they kind of understand a little bit more about Luffy's power and how strong he actually is. He just never really gets serious. He never really has to. Most of the time they're just hunting animals or normal people, and he doesn't really have to use his powers to even deal with them. He just knocks them out with a pipe or something of that sort. So in the coming weeks, months, I can't remember exactly the time period that this would happen in, Sabo is going to leave the island, and it just so happens to be the same day that the Celestial is coming to visit. And so we see a very similar scene play out, where we see Sabo getting shot down simply for being in the way. Luffy, at this point, completely loses his shit. He flies up into the sky, and he doesn't even realize he's doing it at this point. He's basically unconscious, basically just running off of instincts. And he flies up into the sky, and he raises his hand up. A sort of red spark comes off of Luffy's hand. Yes, red lightning. Luffy is going to basically be able to evolve his lightning here. And his second stage is what I'm going to call it, is going to be his red lightning, which is just going to be lightning, but a hell of a lot hotter and faster, basically, is how I'm going to explain how this works. And so, as Luffy raises his hand up into the sky, something odd happens. It seems like a red spark shoots up into the sky, and all of the rain clouds gather, but something is odd about them. There's these odd red flashes in them, along with the flashes of lightning, and a massive, basically, beam of lightning comes down, completely encompassing the Celestial Dragon's ship, and completely erasing it from existence. Every single person on that ship is gone, is dead. They have no chance of ever coming back from that. As Luffy comes back to his senses, he gets a strange feeling. He doesn't know exactly what it is, but for some reason, he can just tell that Sabo is alive. He can't sense Sabo anywhere around, and because for some reason, he doesn't understand why it is exactly that he can do this, but it's basically like an electric field that Luffy has around him that allows him to like sense different things, which when he does unlock something like observation haki is going to make him like basically untouchable. So we see Luffy still up in the sky looking down, and he gets this strange feeling. But he decides to ignore it for the time being because he can't sense Sabo anywhere, and he also can't just jump in the water and go swimming for him because he knows that that is just a bad idea. And so we see Luffy look back towards Fuchsia Village, and he knows he needs to get the fuck out of there. He knows that if he is basically even seen right now, he's going to have a massive bounty for killing not only a celestial dragon, but also for any nobles and marines that were actually on that ship in the first place. And so he decides, he basically turns himself into a bolt of lightning, launches himself down towards Ace, grabs him, and once again launches up towards Mount Kalubo. And so we see Luffy and Ace at the top of the mountain, and they're just standing there, staring at each other, and staring out into the distance. They don't really know how to feel right now, because Luffy got his revenge, and he got it very quickly, but that wasn't going to bring Sabo back. And Luffy tells Ace about his strange feeling that he got, that Sabo was probably still alive, and somebody probably took him somewhere. He doesn't know where, and he doesn't know exactly where he's going to be, or if they'll ever even meet him again, but he tells him and reassures him that Sabo is probably still alive. And so this is basically where we're going to have another major time skip, and we see Ace turning 17. Luffy at this point has basically managed to get a decent amount of control over his Conqueror's Haki, and is actually able to use it somewhat, not quite perfectly, but he recognizes the feeling and is able to basically reproduce it in a minor sort of way. And so we see Ace leaving the island, and Luffy continues his training for the next couple of years until he turns 17 as well, and he would be leaving the island. And so we see Luffy at the shore of Fuchsia Village on a small little dinghy and paddling out into the ocean. Well, no, he wouldn't be paddling. He basically has his hand in the water, and he's using the water manipulation, I guess you could say, of his current Devil Fruit power, basically just manipulating the water in a certain way, basically as like a propeller. And he's basically just pushing himself forward using his Devil Fruit powers, using that concept. As Luffy starts leaving, a massive silhouette appears in front of him. Yes, it is the local Sea King. And Luffy decides that he wants a little bit of a pet for the first part of his journey. He knows he's not going to be able to take it into the Grand Line with him, but he decides he wants it for a little bit, and so he uses his Conqueror's Haki. Yes, after the years, Luffy has been able to control this to a degree that he can use it at will. And we see Luffy basically tying a giant rope to the giant Sea King and using it to pull his little dinghy forward. A little bit overkill, but Luffy decides that it could be fun if he did that. And so we see Luffy setting off to sea. So Luffy would basically be just kind of heading out, and he goes for a couple hours until he sees something a little bit odd. He dodged a whirlpool about an hour back or so, and now he sees a ship in front of him. Deciding that this is probably far enough for the Sea King to go with him, he decides to cut the rope and let him go. Let him go do whatever it is he wants to do. He just kind of wanted to have a little bit of fun with it, and he was riding on top of its head, having a bit of a joyride with it, because it can go a lot faster than him if he wasn't trying to go like full power with his devil fruit. And so Luffy, using his manipulation of the water, would be basically going up to this boat at a pretty quick speed, with absolutely no noise coming from anything. He just kind of slowly, or not slowly, but quickly but silently drifting up to this giant ship. And it's very pink looking, which kind of confuses him, but he jumps up on board and he looks around, and almost immediately he is surrounded by the Alvida pirates. Simply asking them if they had any food anywhere, they make shocked expressions, thinking that this guy's a complete and utter idiot, and they decide that they're just gonna get rid of him because he's kind of just a nuisance and he can't be that strong. So they all charge at him, and Luffy simply decides that, alright, this is enough of that, and he uses his Conqueror's Spirit once again, knocking all of those people out instantly. And so Alvida walks up onto the top of her ship, and she looks at the scene in front of her. All of her men completely knocked out, except for one. Yes, there was one person there that had a strong enough will to not completely go unconscious. All he did was fall on his knees for a while and had a cold sweat running down his face, and that was Kobe. So, we see Alvida looking at Luffy like, alright, the hell is this guy? He's obviously not Roanoa. He can't be here for my bounty. And she asks him, who are you and what do you want? And Luffy says, oh, I'm Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm here because I was hungry. I didn't bring enough food with me. And Alvida looks at this kid incredulously, like, the fuck did you just say to me? And she gets completely pissed by this because she thinks this kid is just an idiot. And so she swings her giant mace up above her head and brings it down on Luffy. Luffy, deciding that he doesn't really want to have to reform and make some big scene out of it, simply dodges to the side, walks forward a couple of steps, and holds his hand back. Once again, we see a strange glow. Not really even a glow. It's basically wind condensing around his hand, and he sends it into Alvida, sending her once again flying off into the horizon. And he looks over at Kobe and asks the same question that he has, for some reason, had to ask for the third time. Got any food? And at this point, Luffy is getting kind of annoyed at this point. And so if this kid decides to say no, he was just going to launch him, just like he did with that, fat old whale that he just did it with before. But Kobe, realizing the situation that he was in, would basically instantly be like, yeah, we have food, just follow me. And so we see Luffy following Kobe under the deck and going down to the storeroom where he devours food from everywhere, using strands of lightning even to basically bring food closer to him, his mouth and his hands, so he can eat it even faster. Kobe's looking at this kid, or not even a kid in terms of him, looking at this man, and he asks the question that has been on his mind since he even saw him. What are you doing here? What are you doing out on the sea? Luffy looks at him, giving him a wide grin, and says, I'm gonna be the Pirate King! And Kobe looks at him and he's like, impossible, until he gets whacked on the top of the head by Luffy. What was that for? Luffy looks at him and says, because I felt like it. And Kobe at this point is like, he doesn't really know what to say anymore, and we see them going up to the top of the deck. Luffy doesn't really care any that much, and Alvida's already done for, so it's not like Kobe has to like spill his heart out anymore. And Luffy decides he's going to take him with him, because he did say that he wanted to be a Marine. He just didn't make some like big speech out of it. And so we see Luffy drop down onto what he thinks is his dinghy, but it doesn't really matter. He doesn't have anything on it anyway. And he drops down in between two ships. And as he does so, he realizes something. He is on a dinghy with another person that is not Kobe. And this person is going to be Nami. And he looks over at her and says, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" Nami looks at him incredulously and is kind of just weirded out, pissed, and confused all at the same time. This myriad of emotions kind of just flows through her, and she decides that she's basically just going to yell at him. Shark teeth come out, and she starts yelling, "The hell do you think you're doing here?" Luffy, holding his hands up in surrender, just trying to get her to calm down, says, Sorry. I was up there, and after I beat up those pirates, I needed another ship to go to. And I thought this was mine, to be honest, but he doesn't really want to admit that. So he just says, I needed another ship, and we need to go somewhere now, because the Marines are over there. And turns out they actually were. And so Luffy puts his hand in the water. Nami looking at him, wondering exactly what he is about to do, because she was about to start paddling. And all of a sudden, the ship starts moving. Or the dinghy. It's not really a ship. But it starts moving, and they start accelerating, going faster and faster and faster, until they were cruising at a healthy, let's say, 25-30 miles per hour, and they were just kind of cruising. And Luffy asks Nami, where exactly do you want to go? Because I don't know where we're going, and I don't really know how to navigate either. I just kind of came out here. And Nami looks at him like, he must really be an idiot. But also that he could be useful. He's pretty strong, and he has weird, unique abilities that could actually help her in her, dream of getting all of that money and stealing from pirates. And so she asks, "You want to join up with me?" And Luffy asks exactly what it is she's out here at sea doing, and she explains that she's basically here stealing from pirates, because all pirates are scum. And Luffy looks at her and says, no, I'm good. And Nami says, "Oh, come on, we could do a lot together. Why are you even out here at sea anyway?" Kobe, looking over at Luffy, says, don't do it, thinking that to himself in his head, and Luffy looks at her and sends her a bright smile before he stands up, holding both of his hands out in the air, and says, "I'm gonna be the Pirate King!" Nami looks at Luffy, and immediately her expression changes, from one of joy and happiness to one of complete and utter disgust, as she's looking at what she now knows is a pirate. Luffy, looking at her, immediately recognizing that look, says, "Not all pirates are scum like the ones that probably have hurt you." Nami, realizing that she basically had all of her emotions plastered on her face, returns to a neutral face and says, "Yeah, well, tell that to my home village." And Luffy at this point is like, "Well, why don't you join me and I can try to prove you wrong?" And Nami looks at him and gives him a questioning look, trying to figure out what exactly his motives are, but can't read them on his face. He just seems to be a normal kid. And says, "I'll think about it, maybe after we go to the next island." And she asks, where exactly are they even trying to go in the first place? And Luffy asks where the nearest marine base is, because he needs to drop Kobe off there. And so they start heading off to Shell's Town. And after even just a couple of hours, because of how fast the boat is traveling, they arrive there. And they see the giant marine base coming into view. "So this is Shell's Town, huh?" says Luffy. And Kobe would mention that this is, I'm pretty sure, where I heard that they were keeping Roro and Zoro. Luffy asks about him and gets a brief explanation of who he is and says, "He sounds interesting. Maybe I'll ask him to join my crew." Kobe, doing his same old thing, says, "Impossible. And that sort of thing would happen until Luffy bonks him over the head again and asks once more, "What was that for?" "You were being annoying," Luffy would say. And so Kobe decides to shut up, and they arrive at the island and go to the dock. After tying up the ship, they start walking onto the island, and Luffy goes up to somebody and asks, "Hey, are they keeping Roro and Zoro here?" And immediately everybody gets a fearful face and backs away from him, and Luffy understands that, okay, yeah, he's probably here. And Kobe says we probably shouldn't mention Zoro around here. They probably don't exactly have a very good impression of exactly who he is. But he also begins to mention that the captain of this island is named Captain Axehand Morgan. And once again, everybody recoils from them in fear. Luffy and Nami would both narrow their eyes at this, knowing that the world isn't completely black and white and there's a lot of gray in it. And they decide to keep this in mind for when they're, trying to either recruit Zoro or, for Nami, trying to go and steal a certain map that she thinks is actually here. And so they continue walking forward until they reach basically where the front of the marine base is, and they see a massive wall in front of them. And Luffy, deciding to climb up to the top of it, looks over and says, "Hey Kobe, come up here. Is this Zoro?" Kobe saying, "No, that's impossible. They wouldn't just have him out here in the open," until he shrieks and says, "What? Zoro." Okay, that was a little bit cringe, but that's okay. And so we see Nami, Kobe, and Luffy sitting up on top of the wall looking at him. And Zoro looks up, says, "Get lost." And they don't really care about this. He doesn't really look all that intimidating, tied up there, malnourished and all. And they hear a clink next to them, and they look down and see a ladder with a small girl climbing up it with a rope and some, rice balls in her hand. And so she climbs up to the top, ties the rope on the other side of the fence, and drops and climbs down. She walks up to Zoro, and at this point Nami is kind of worried, and so is Kobe, but Luffy is just looking on in interest, wondering exactly what is going to happen here. And so we see her trying to feed Zoro, him yelling at her, telling her to get lost, and eventually Helmeppo, the son of the captain, arrives. Immediately, Nami and Luffy can see the arrogant look on his face and think that something bad might happen here, but Kobe sighs in relief and says, "Oh, thank God the Marines are here." And so we see Helmeppo walking out. He tries one of the rice balls, tastes that it has sugar instead of salt in it, and stomps on the other one, just basically driving it down into the mud, making Kobe shocked by his actions. And he says, "Do you know who my father is, little girl?" And getting a cold sweat running down her face, the girl would nod fearfully and says, "Well, there has actually been a new order passed that anybody assisting a criminal is going to be executed." Getting even more fearful and cold sweat running down her face at this point, she is about to basically try to run away, but he says, "But I'm feeling nice and you're just a kid after all, so I'm just going to throw you out," as he orders one of the Marines following after him to grab the girl and kick her. The Marine, whispering into the girl's ear, says, "Try to tuck and roll. It won't hurt as much when you land." And so he quite literally drop kicks the girl outside of the fence. And Nami is shocked by this, trying to run over and catch her, but Luffy would disappear in a bolt of lightning and appear next to the girl, grabbing her and landing on his feet as he smiles at her and says, "Hey, you okay?" And she nods at him, giving him a big goofy smile, and he tells the other three, basically, he tells them to go and take the girl and he'll catch up with them. And so Luffy once again climbs back on top of the wall, and he looks over at Zoro after Helmeppo and the Marines leave. Once again looking up, Zoro asks what he wants. Luffy says, "Join my pirate crew." However, this is where I'm going to be leaving this part off at. Yes, a sort of cliffhanger, except we all know what's going to happen if you've watched One Piece. So, tune back in for part 2, and I'll see you guys later. Peace out.